What's up, everybody? Welcome back to BRS Fresh. My name is Jesse, and today we're talking about how to clean a freshwater aquarium. But not just one aquarium, we're gonna show you how to clean 4 different aquariums, 4 different styles of aquariums, and they all have unique challenges. They've got different types of algae in them, they've got different types of space issues. So we're gonna show you some tips, we're gonna show you some tricks, and we're gonna show you some basics on how to be successful cleaning an aquarium. Let's get after it. First one is this Dragonstone. We call it the Dragonstone Armageddon tank. And as you can see here, we've got a lot going on. We've got a trail that's all sorts of dirty. We've got this weird algae on here that looks like hair algae, and maybe there is some hair algae in there, but I'm not really sure what this fuzzy stuff is in here. If you know, let me know. We definitely have brown diatom algae, pretty classic. So let's get after how we clean this. The first thing that we've got to do is use things that are designed to clean glass, you guys. A lot of people make the mistake of using like a sponge or something like that. And if you get down here and you grab grains of sand with a sponge and you drag them up your glass, you're going to be scratching this, right? Especially with acrylic. Like if you have an acrylic tank, use the right materials. They actually sell acrylic cleaner, right? Here, what we're gonna do is use a classic scraper. The reason why this is cool, number one, is that it's angled to be able to scrape off the algae, and also you can get down below the substrate with it. So watch, I'm gonna come down here and I'm just making a nice, perfectly clear line right down here with that algae. But if you get right down in here, you can see that I can get below the substrate line and I can clean that annoying little level of algae that also exists there. And we'll suck all this up here in a second, so don't worry about that. So you can just come through here with a tool like this and make your glass nice and clean. But what happens though is that you then get into the corners over here. And when you get into the corners, you gotta change the game. You can use a filter floss, okay? Now filter floss is something you might have around, especially if you have canister filters. And I like to just grab a little square of this. And the reason why I'm doing that is because when you get into the corners and you have the silicone in the corners, you don't want to compromise the integrity of the silicone with hard objects like razors or even like some of the magnets that you might use on glass. So what we'll do instead is we'll take something softer like this and we'll get down here and then we can just push, and check out how I'm pulling this straight out of the corner like that, right? Get all of that nice and clean right there. Now, I could go across the whole glass with this thing, but I prefer to use the algae scraper where it's designed and then use these in the corners. If you also have a brush, which is super helpful, which I'll show you in a second, for cleaning like wood, rock, things like that, a brush like this will also get into the corners and do the same job. So right here, I'm just getting that corner all nice and cleaned up, and I'm not compromising the integrity of the silicone. And I can use this as an option to scrape off this, which will all end up getting siphoned out. So we know we can use a brush on the hardscape, we know what we need to use on the glass, but now we've got a trail. And maybe you want to do a trail like that. And if you do, this kind of stuff is going to happen. All right, so a 1/2-inch tube like this. One of the things I like to do is cut an angle. And the reason is if you go with the flat end and you're trying to suction, just the top of this off, you're probably going to end up suctioning a ton of sand off, right? Maybe even a little bit more than you'd like. Now with an angle, you can hold it you can have this piece touch the sand and this is up off the sand, and it allows you to suck really what's on top off a little bit easier without totally, removing your entire trail. So I can get that first layer off. I can also come across here and I can use this to siphon off a lot of this algae as well. So now we're going to talk about how you replace a trail. So what I like to do is just take the sand and put it into a little cup like this. And I'm obviously not going to up here pour in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take that cup and I'm going to go straight down over the trail, because a little bit's going to fall out. Always does right there. So if you're really particular about where you want that sand to go, just wait for that to fall out, wait for all that air to fill up. Once that's done, then this is literally going to pour out as if you weren't even in the water. Especially if you have like a little spout like I do on this beaker, you can be very specific. Once you're done with this, you'll have a nice, clean, white trail. Just go ahead and turn that straight up and down, lift it straight out, and you don't cause any other problems in the tank. Okay, for this next tank, we've got this little cube, and you can see that we've got hair grass, we've got a little cyano on the rock down there. We've got some of that hair grass growing long in the plants, but we also have some attached to the wood. So we're gonna use some similar techniques. One of the things though that I like to do is start with thin little airline tube. And one of the things that you can do, especially with mosses, is you'll find that if you get in here with anything too big, you can really disturb the mosses itself. If you get in here with a little airline tube, you can scrape out some of this kind of stuff and then you can suck it up. And one of the other reasons why I like to use an airline tube like this is you're getting more of a bang for your buck as far as the water loss for the amount that you're cleaning. I'm getting a lot of this algae cleaned off, but I haven't used up a ton of water. Now I'm gonna take that brush and I'm gonna see what kind of work I can do right here on this piece of wood. Now the nice thing about this brush, and when you're working a piece of wood like this or even another rock, is you can be pretty forceful. You can definitely put some pressure on this algae, especially if you have a stubborn hair algae like this is. It's pretty sticky. You can see it's getting the job done. It's getting a lot of the algae off. At the same time, the goal here, at least in my opinion, isn't to have this look like it was fresh out of the box. A little bit of algae makes it look natural. And you can see here with this brush, I'm gonna be able to do a good amount of work on this rock. That isn't the type of natural look that I'm going for. So I'm gonna try to make sure that that rock gets a little bit more clean than what I'm worrying about on the wood. All right, now the other thing to keep in mind is, we're always talking about these different tools and things like that, but your fingers can do a lot of work too. Try to be a little bit more surgical with it. Sometimes I'll just like massage a leaf like that, especially if you get some diatom algae sitting on the leaves. This is one way to do it. In this grassy area here, you can actually kind of do the same thing. You can just gently sort of go through the grass like this, and you're ultimately just trying to loosen up that algae to get up into the water column so that you can then take it out. One of the reasons why I'm doing this is because I don't want to be spending all this time rubbing these leaves or the wood here while I'm suctioning out the water. I don't have enough water in this tank to take the time to remove all that algae while simultaneously doing the water change. So I want to make sure I do all of that work first. Then I can get in there, and in this case, I'm going to get in there with a 1/2 inch tube. I know typically the go-to is a gravel vac. I'll get there with a gravel vac, but I like to have more of the power that this gives me to suck out all of those larger floating objects first and use the gravel vac for what it's intended to be for, which is the actual substrate itself. So now this is super powerful. This is going to absolutely take everything that I just removed with my fingers and it's going to suck it up, but it's also going to allow me to get under here and get things in places that a gravel vac would be difficult to get. Now I'm managing my water, so I'm thinking about that as I'm going through. I'm just getting the bigger objects. I'm not really trying to get into the gravel, and that's about it. Now, if you have a larger tank with more water, you could spend more time doing that, but with like a little 30C like this, a little cube, I think this is 7.5 gallons if I remember right, you don't want to, the next thing you know, if you don't pay attention, you're going to drain the water out of it like that, especially with a 1/2 inch tube. So use it very surgically and specifically for what you're trying to do, which is mostly remove large floaters, and then you can get into the gravel vac for the final touch. This one I'm going to use because it's going to be a little bit less powerful. It's not going to suction out the water super fast, but it will get the job done as far as removing any of the detritus from this substrate. One of the things that can happen is if you get too deep, you can end up getting too much gravel. I'm like on purposely getting all that gravel up the tube like that. Now, if I were to move from this spot, I'd be putting all of that planted substrate and gravel all over the place where I don't want it. So what I'll do instead is I'll kink the tube, and once I kink the tube, it will drop it all back down exactly where it was. You see how it's not vacuuming? Unkink the tube, and now I'm back to vacuuming. So keep in mind that depending on the tank that you have, or even the spaces you have in the tank, it might make sense to have more than one vac. At this point, the other thing that I want to do is I want to come in here and I'm just going to cup that vacuum like that and bring it up. And then I can just let it flow back into the bucket like that. Now the reason why I did that is because if I just pull the vacuum straight up, and I bet this has happened to you, especially with a larger like 2-inch vac and a little bit more powerful, if you pull it straight up, that air bubble is going to fill in and it's going to rush all the water in that vacuum back out into your tank. Not only is that going to spray a bunch of detritus or whatever was in the tube back in your tank, but moreover, even if that had sucked down the tube, what's going to happen is it's going to do a rush, like a force of water that's going to blow your substrate out, and then all of that cleaning that you just did is going to look like you didn't do it. So that's a little trick for how to exit the vacuum. You also can, if you have the space for it, you can turn the vacuum up like this and lift it out, but just don't lift the vacuum out of the tank. All right, guys, we're at our third tank here, and this tank has a lot of the same stuff we've already seen, so you guys know what to do, right? We could be scrubbing the wood with a brush. We could be using an airline tube to be sucking some of the hair algae out. We could be scrubbing the leaves with our fingers, all the stuff we just talked about. The unique situation that we have here is plants, right? And specifically ground cover, like this dwarf hairgrass. Now this is covered with some hair algae, and as you know, hair algae comes, it's oftentimes referred to as green, but it can be brown, it can be gray. And in this case, we've got some brown hair algae growing in here, and the first thing I'm gonna do is do a trim. Now, in this particular tank, one of the things that you have to consider is, sure, I could trim this all and let it float to the top as you typically would and eventually try to net it out or whatever. But as you can see, I don't have a lot of surface area in this tank to be doing a lot of netting out of plants. So I'm gonna try to siphon the cuttings out simultaneously as I'm using these little spring scissors from UNS to lawn mow this dwarf hairgrass. Let's see how that works. All right, so I get my siphon started here and I'll be able to get some of that algae out. As you can see, I'm really getting a lot of that hair. In fact, it's going up so fast that you can't even hardly tell. Okay, so once you've trimmed the hairgrass, you can come back here with a brush and you see this algae that's stuck down here because you just, some of it's lower than what you're going to cut. One of the cool things that you can do with a brush is you can just scrape kind of gently like this, and you can see how it's gonna pull that algae out. When you have it rooted pretty well, this will help you clean those areas of algae that have gotten down deep in the blades of the grass. Once you get all this floating up into the tank, then you can just siphon it out. So now last I mentioned this tank, and one of the things that I like to do in a situation like this in this paludarium is come back to that airline tube, and you guys already know the drill, but really just making the point that if you have things really tucked back in where there's literally no other way you're getting to it, it's a perfect example of why using something like this is important. And also, I've got very little water to deal with, so I need to be able to get that big bang for my buck once again. So as you can see, I've got stuff way back here. I'm gonna get that tube all the way back here when I would really have no other way to reach. And I can suck all of that up. I can come back here, I can get way deep under this rock like this. Again, no other way that I'd be getting to these areas if I wasn't using a tube like this. And now it comes to filling them up. And when you're filling up these freshwater tanks, there's a couple different techniques that you can use, and I'm gonna show you 3 different ones based upon 3 different tanks. So with this first one, what I don't wanna do is pick up a bucket. Well, I just don't wanna pick up a bucket, but even if I did, I don't wanna turn it over and dump it in this tank. It's gonna explode, right? I'll lose all the rock, the trail, the whole thing. Especially if you have planted substrate, it's gonna blow up into the air. So you don't wanna do that. So the way you can get around that, one way is you can grab a inexpensive little pump like this one, and you can take your tube that you would typically just have on your Python vac, and you can throw that onto this pump like this. And then what you're gonna do is just drop it in your bucket. And before you plug it in, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a cup like this, and this can just be like a little bowl or something like that. And I'm gonna fill it with water, and I'm gonna just set it right down here. Cool? Then I'm gonna take my Python tube, I'm gonna put it in there, and it's always helpful to have one of these little clamps that you can just get at a big box store. I'm not gonna clamp the tube itself to the glass, it's just not gonna work, trust me. Clamp the tube into this area right here. That's gonna keep this pointed down into your cup. And then we're going to plug this in. And you can see we've got like a real nice stream, it's pretty powerful. But all of that power is blowing into this cup, and then it's diffusing out into the tank. And you can see it's hardly disturbing anything in the tank. So if you want to fill your tank up pretty quick, but not disturb anything, this is one great technique. Now in the next setup, what we're gonna do here is we're gonna aim for like a hard piece of material. So in this case, it's gonna be this log. It also could be a flat rock or something like that. And the reason why we're gonna do that is we're gonna use that to essentially deflect just the way we did with the cup. It's just another technique you can use depending on the setup that you have. Now again, I'm gonna want to clamp this down because if I don't, it's going to shoot this thing off backwards like this. And now in this case, the exact same thing is happening. We're able to fill this tank up rapidly with very little disturbance to the rest of the tank or the substrate itself or the plants using a structure piece in the tank. All right, now the third technique I'm gonna show you is if you have a situation like this where, you know, essentially you might not wanna set a cup down on your grass, or you have a more delicate, hard structure in here. Like this piece of spiderwood isn't the same as that flat driftwood over there. It's got rhizomes on it that I don't wanna blow off. So I'm gonna use a different technique, which is using a plastic bag. Now this can be just a sandwich bag or something like that. And what I'm gonna do is, obviously if I just cut the whole bottom off this, then it doesn't do anything. I'm gonna cut a corner off of it. So probably take like a 45 like this. And this is going to minimize the amount of flow that comes out of this tube. I'm just gonna get this down here, really not onto where the opening is, but actually over here into this area. And then I can set that right down in here. I'm gonna let that bag fill up a little bit. And then I'm gonna use my clamp again, just to make sure I'm holding this thing down. All right, so we're gonna plug our pump in, and then we're gonna let the water fill up into the bag, and it's both gonna dissipate out of that corner we cut and potentially out of the top as well. Just depends on how big the corner is you cut. All right, so again, we've got a pretty strong flow in here. The water is filling up in the tank because it's coming out of that little cut in the side. It's not really overflowing the top of the bag, which is fine. And we're holding everything down with that clamp, and we're causing minimal disruption, if any at all, to what you have in the tank itself. All right, guys, that's how you clean freshwater tanks with some basic techniques and some tips and tricks, and we'll see you on the next one.